I'm Lisa Davis. I am an intern with Project Censored, and I began my work last fall in 2014. I was brought into the project by one of my former professors, Nolan Higdon. He was always raving about media literacy and how important it is to sort of look at the intersection of like history with media in the class. And so one time he was like, you know, I'm part of this organization, Project Censored, and we're all about like service learning and media literacy with students and such. And I just asked him after class, like, how can I get involved? Because I'm pretty upset about quite a few things that are being portrayed through media and the narratives that I'm seeing, specifically surrounding women and women of color. And so being part of the project gave me an opportunity to examine and explore the intersection between race, gender, and the media. And I was lucky enough to come into the project during a time where we were asked to write an article, an overarching like feminist article, and I was able to address and research that very thing, is like race and gender in the media. So I guess in my future, I am a political, legal, economic analysis major at Mills College, and I hope to continue doing more research and possibly writing more papers. And I'm specifically interested in race in education, also in the US education system, and I'll likely do lots of research with that and try to figure out solutions to how we can sort of break down these disparities between like schools that are impoverished and schools that are of privilege. I would say just be mindful and be aware of what you see on TV and hear in the news and watch in movies, and decide to question what you see and decide for yourself the image that you want for yourself, how empowered you want to be and what you want to do. And, you know, spend some time developing that, even at a young age, even if you're in like 5th and 6th grade. Just think about cause and effect of your decisions. Like, if I do this or if I make this decision, how will this impact me? How will I be viewed by my teachers or my parents, or how do I feel about myself? So just think about cause and effect and question what you see in the media and decide to think positive about yourselves. Hi everyone, my name is Lisa Davis, and the most interesting thing about working with Project Censored and doing this Women in the Media article is that I actually evolved quite a bit as a person and learned more than I anticipated learning about feminism as a whole. And a shocking thing that I realized is that I never really considered myself a feminist. And the reason for that is that while feminism, it's a very broad subject, and it's very all-encompassing with like women's rights and like women's ability or their agency and such, there's also an issue of race. There's this sort of invisible issue of race with feminism, and it's one of the reasons that as a woman of color it's been difficult for me in my life to say I'm a feminist, because in history feminism has always been looked upon from a woman of color's perspective as like the white woman's privilege, to say these are the issues that we're facing in society as women, but you still have white privilege in a way. So it's a bit easier to say like, I'm going to stand up for women's rights and have a voice, where they may have more of a voice than I would as a woman of color. So in my research for the article, I covered the male gaze and race in media. And in fact, like, the overarching theme of our article was the male gaze, as far as how corporate media views women. And I actually figured out that it's not so much the male gaze, it's really the white male gaze. And the reason I say that is because 90% of the media that we consume is owned by 6 companies, and every one of the CEOs that runs those companies are white males. The reason that's important is because there's consequences to that. Those consequences include biased narratives, not just women of color, but just people of color in general, women in general, but my specific research was women of color. And so those biased narratives will include, you know, the marginalization of women of color, criminalization of women of color in all facets of the media. That's news, entertainment, scenarios that just depict women of color always seem to have this sort of stereotypical dark narrative that's reflective of Western colonialization from like hundreds of years ago. You see this constant portrayal of like black women, Asian women, Latinas, every woman of color as this over-sexualized, criminalized, masculinized woman who is not really allowed to partake in Western feminism or to be part of that protective sort of like realm of feminism. And so yeah, my article basically goes into that, and I give lots of examples of how like women of color are portrayed. And it's frustrating for me because I always want to know why. I'm always looking for like, why is this happening? You know, the first answer I got, of course, was like, okay, all the white males are controlling the media, but what can we really do about that? And that caused me to go into more of a psychological analysis of like what's going on with America and with the media and the people that are running it. And I found myself sort of delving into schema theory, where when we're raised or when people are brought up, we're given this sort of, we have this slate that's written on, right, psychologically. And I find that like people that are running the media or just like the average person in general sort of develops this schema or prior knowledge that's the consequence of like a generational cycle from slavery and Western colonialization. And so my solution to that is like, okay, we have to eradicate this and we have to break cycles of how people are viewed on an individual level. Because it's short of overhauling the entire media and like firing everyone that's running it right now and sort of starting over again, I think that would be a little difficult. So it's like, well, let's take it on a family basis, and not to, and I know that shrinks it down really far to say like families, what do you mean? It's like the only hope is like the next generation, right? So if we start teaching children or like reteaching ourselves as adults that what you're consuming in media, it's time to question that. It's time to say like, these narratives of these women of color or people of color or people of like this sort of oppressed group, is that really real? Do I need to buy into this? Like, you know, I give the example in my article piece about like the Popeyes chicken lady and the pie and salt lady. There's always this sort of like stereotypical Southern black vernacular that the white male gaze is comfortable with projecting like time and time again, when even though there's like examples and there's all of these different examples of women of color that don't speak like that. You know, I think in psychology that's called confirmation bias, where you see something different than what you want to believe, but still continue to believe that anyway. And I think that the media is perpetuating that, and it's frustrating for me. But my hope is to say, like, I don't have children yet, but I do work with kids, and so in that position, like in my individual level, I try to like impart sort of subliminal messages to young people that says like, oh, guess what you can do? Oh, have you ever thought about maybe you could run for president? Oh, entrepreneurship is wonderful. Oh, you're 7 years old, you want to start your own business? Let's, you know, you like to sew or you like to do crafts, let's get out there and own your own business. Or you want to, you know, work on trucks? Okay, like I try to put as much of a broad perspective out there to sort of give them more schema or prior knowledge of themselves, of what they're capable of as young people, as especially little girls of color, because if they're absorbing what we're seeing so far with like Disney movies, commercials, it looks as if women of color are sort of stuck in this subjugated role, where it's either you're a Jezebel or you've got this like, what is it, the angry black woman attitude, or you're sassy. Or I've even experienced that. Like, I've had people come up to me and say like, oh, you know, you'll be fine because, you know, you're black. You can get that little sassy attitude, you know, the black woman attitude. I'm like, I actually don't have that, and I'm kind of intimidated by anyone that like communicates like that. So, you know, and there's that confirmation bias. It's like you see it in front of me and you know that I don't speak like that. But again, it's the media that sort of perpetuates these stereotypes, and we just have to take it one step at a time on an individual level and like spread this information to people about the media. And it's just also disappointing and sad for me in my research to discover just how much the media is controlled by the government. One of our advisors, Nolan Higdon, who's not here today, but he was here yesterday, in one interview, I really liked what he said. He said, there's this obfuscation between the press and government, and there are consequences of that as well. And I sort of started to question, well, why would the government want to sort of like hinder or control the media and the messages that are being portrayed? There's always this sort of agenda to propagandize people to uphold this hierarchy. Like a couple of, I think Ellie acknowledged that, Crystal too. Like there's this hierarchy in the American system, and like with privilege and white supremacy, and there's like such a historical context to that we just have to take control of what we absorb. And I could keep rambling on and on. I'm really passionate about this, but what I would like to say is like, knowing that the CEOs that are running 90% of media are just in one social group, which are like white heterosexual males. It's not to be angry at white people or like white men. It's just to make that observation and know whenever you have like limited people running something, there's going to be consequences of that. And that's why I'm asking people to know that information and now choose to seek out information on your own and make your own educated assumptions, or like form your own beliefs about people and about politics and about women, and like open your mind to realize that like what we're being fed, those frequencies that are being fed through media are often very negative and they're not true. Question that, and make your own decision and make your own choice about what you decide to absorb. So yeah, with that said, I will turn my speech over to Darian.